Today, actually, I will talk a little bit about some technical issues and agile quality assurance in a corporate environment. And you had a long day. I'm the last guy. So please stick with me. I'm also doing this the first time for such a big audience, so I will be nervous, and so please don't blame me on that. I will actually try to talk a little bit about how we apply those things that you heard today in practice in Danske Bank. And a little bit about me. I started my career more than 10 years ago as a developer. Then I moved as a business analyst, as a project manager. Eventually, I became a CTO of a local small company. So I had to deal with all the challenges that I have in IT. After that, I moved into Danske Bank and became the head of asset finance IT. What does that mean actually, right? So now I'm working in a bank. That means I'm in charge of 40 plus systems. I have 50 plus people. I have a budget of millions, but then again, I have billions in a business portfolio to support. So that means I'm actually still struggling a little bit. And I want to tell you our story, particularly the story of NorthStar, which use case I will use today. And before joining Danske Bank, I had the perception, how does a bank look? And for me, that was a fortress. You don't know what's actually behind there, but most likely it's very secure, very busy. There's a lot of bureaucracy. Things happening there are not very clear. And that's, of course, a purpose for that. But actually, behind the curtain, there's a lot of craziness happening on. We do things in new ways. We tried out new stuff like Agile. And you can see from the pictures, actually, that we are also having fun. And sometimes the question raises, okay, what the hell is that, right? So why are we doing that? Well, at one point, we understood that even as a bank, we need to have the ambition of actually going into Agile. And for the sole purpose of actually creating better customer solutions. We need to focus on faster time to market. We need to focus on working more effectively. And yet again, I think the question would be, okay, why? Well, the sole reason of that actually that we're not good enough. We're not competitive anymore in the market if we don't offer good solutions. And that means that we need to talk a lot about what we do and how we do it. It's not acceptable anymore that we, as a bank, let's say, are slow in providing our services. It's also not acceptable anymore that customers are ignored when they call us or visit us, right? That's why Danske Bank went on this endeavor actually of trying to do Agile. And well, we cannot do only Agile. The organization is 19,000 employees. So we have to do Agile at scale. And we started with different ways of doing things. And I don't know, hopefully some of you have heard about Mobile Pay, which is the mobile application that is actually, by downloads in Denmark, it's the #1 place. It's just above Facebook. But most of you, of course, haven't heard about the other stuff that we're doing. And we're doing more interesting things. And one of those things is in asset finance, and that is NorthStar. And I would ask you all, okay, what is NorthStar all about? But I bet you don't know, right? So the easy answer to that is it's all about financing cars. That's the product that we're doing, and that's the area that we're working in. And this is more of an introduction, actually, what I'm going to talk about later and how the journey started. And when we started, we immediately said, okay, let's leave the old ways of working behind and let's create NorthStar, which will be the new way of working, the best practices. Everything is agile, fast time to market. Let's build future-proof stuff and let's make it work in a way that actually builds the new customer solutions. And we raised ourselves 3 goals. Number 1 goal was we wanted to do customer-facing solutions that are digital. Well, that's just a nice front end, easy to explain. Then we used very, very difficult words where we decided that, okay, let's do a science-based asset risk engine. I would say that I doubt that anybody of you would truly understand what that means. But in layman terms, since we're talking about financing cars, we're talking about the perspective that we actually commit to the risk of that car. Well, what we do as a bank, right, we take risk on things. And what that implies is that when you lease a car from us for 3 years, after those 3 years, we buy back that car from you. What is the tricky part out of that? Well, the tricky part out of that actually that if we get that valuation of that car wrong, we will lose money. Because we today commit to the thing that we are going to buy back in 3 years. That's the tricky part if you consider things like Tesla. It's like a smartphone right now, right? It has all the new tech, but the smartphone right now is obsolete within 3 years. What about cars, right? So the challenge in that is actually the perspective that now, or for the last, let's say, 20 years, it has been done. Okay, what is the car worth in 3 years? 100,000. So it's not acceptable anymore, and we don't feel safe taking on the risk if we do things by gut feeling. So we need to do actually a little bit more data science. So this was one goal that we raised our goal of making things science-based. That means collecting a lot of data, evaluating them, and reducing our marginal risk. And the third thing was automated credit decision. Well, I would say in theory everybody does that. I don't need to talk that much about that. So what we decided afterwards was to fulfill those 3 goals. We have a very short customer journey, what we call, and that means we have to tinker and tinker the things how customers interact with us. So you start with the very first perspective. You think that you want a car. So you have to figure out, okay, how do you get there? Typically, the woman decides what car she wants and the man tries to buy it. Then they need to figure out, okay, what do the financial terms are? And that depends actually a lot on the country. There's different perspectives, but I would say most of the time people try to avoid buying it by cash because that's actually the second biggest purchase in your household, and that's a lot of money. Why should you pay immediately? Then we did this very, very nice stuff. We created our baby. The solution is running. We released it. We are awaiting customers. It looks so nice. It's like the nicest solution we have ever done. And like typically, I would say, we find out we have a major bug. And well, that came unexpectedly, right? Oh, we did so much quality assurance, and we tested the hell out of it, and then we still end up in a situation where we are. So the truth to be said, there was a study done by IBM once that the cost of fixing a bug is actually increases the further away you get from the development. And when we started, we were actually by far not good enough in finding the bugs soon. And if somebody, I'm talking at a TestCon and will ask you if somebody doesn't get why does it cost so much, but the easy answer to that is when a developer is focused on the content, it sometimes takes them 5 minutes to fix a bug. But after a few months, when you find a bug, nobody understands the concept anymore. Most likely the developer doesn't even know what he's done. Somebody else needs to fix it. So by default, that fixing takes 2 days. So instead of 5 minutes, you are spending 2 days. Well, that's not a good situation to be in. I can tell you that. That's also not a situation that we wanted to be in. But we saw a small challenge in that. How do we solve that if we don't have any testers? Right? because when we started, our development team actually didn't have any testers. Because when we started, we were thinking, okay, we have a skeleton crew of very few developers, and when you have to make a decision, let's say, when you have 5 people, when you hire another one, you have to make this very, very conscious choice. Do you hire a tester or do you hire a developer? I would bet you know who wins. And you end up in the situation where you're increasing the number of developers, but you're not increasing the number of testers. However, that doesn't remove the responsibility that somebody does need to do testing, right? We still need to ensure quality. So how do we make this a success? And to answer that question, I will tell you actually another story. Just last week, I was flying to Denmark, and actually I met a Google engineer who was sitting just beside me. And we got into talking, okay, how is the setup in Google? How do they actually work, and what are the practices that they use? And it was very funny, at least not that funny to me, but funny for him, that when we started talking, he reminded me that in Google, they have only one role. That's a software engineer. There's also managers, but they are also software engineers. So more or less, in Google, you have only one role, so it's easy, right? Well, it didn't answer my questions or my challenges. But then I was in San Francisco once. I had actually the same talk with Google, and I actually had the same talk with Facebook. And the interesting story was that both Google and Facebook have billions of customers. They have complexity of their systems that is huge, but when you talk to them, they have 0 dedicated testers. I asked myself, what the hell? How do you do that? The tricky story to that is, how they at least explained to me, was that, well, everyone is responsible for quality. And I didn't get it at first. What do they mean with that? How? But they explained to me in very simple terms that with the level of the software engineering skills that they have, by default, the code quality is very good. They also have fairly strict rules of what is being pushed into production and how that actually is checked. One of the examples is they have a very strict rule of having 95% code coverage by unit testing. That's actually a very high number when you ask, because sometimes you have like this balance of, do you do any unit test? Is it worth it? Is there value in it? And of course, you have to deliver faster, so most of the time you cut that. But they are very strict on that. Another thing that they enforce is that they do code reviews in the whole organization, and the tricky part of that is that the code that the developer uses is not reviewed by the person in his department, but by any random person, actually by 2 random persons in the whole organization. What that means, a huge knowledge sharing community. That means that instead of somebody who is partial saying that, oh, I know that guy, he's doing code well, I don't have to actually review it in detail, right? He's doing great. When you remove that and you add the randomness and the level of development that they have, actually that increases the quality to a level that, well, I would argue, let's say, how often does Google crash? But they do also. So, but anyway, that's what actually I learned from the market as a whole, that there are practices where you don't have dedicated testers, but you still resolve those things through the common responsibility and through a lot of tools. So what we have done in NorthStar is we focused a lot on continuous delivery. And we focused a lot actually that we ensure that we run a lot of tests in our solution, that we automate a lot. And that's for a reason. And we use these tools in our solution. And just before me, Cypress was presented, and actually we're looking into using that also. But currently, we're using just Puppeteer and Selenium. And well, a short demo of Puppeteer, which is actually, when I was looking into it, quite similar to how Cypress works, where first, as a developer, you define the test code. Then, when you have defined it, you run it, which starts up the Chrome browser and runs the sequence of your code through the solution. How we do it is we have several flows that we want to test out, right? We are also actually not always looking like this, where the developers looks like at this. We use it in the continuous integration perspective, where we spin up a OpenShift container, which basically spins up the Puppeteer solution, runs that test, and shuts it down. And where the Puppeteer is cool is in the area that actually, if something goes wrong, it does screenshots, right? You can afterwards, as a developer, go back and look what did fail, what was the error message, and try to figure out how all of those things actually worked out in a manner that we have some bugs somewhere. For backend, we have different tools. We're of course using JUnit, we're using Mockito, and we are using SOAP UI. Those tools are more focused that actually, when we build our solution, our architecture is fairly microservice based. So that means we have separate entities that we have to test that are independent, that come into one single solution. And that works in a manner that we also do end-to-end testing in the SOAP UI tool, where we set up the flow that we want to test. And one of those examples is we call them happy path, because we need to figure out actually sometimes that, okay, most importantly, the happy path must work, right? Then, only then, we're talking about edge cases. Because who cares about the edge cases if the happy path doesn't work? And funny story from my previous experience when I was a CTO, the head of sales runs into my office screaming, "Nothing works! Fix it!" I was saying, well, everything works except for payments. In an e-commerce solution, that was bold from me, I would say. I was called it for a year on that. But then again, there's a definition between nothing works and something concretely that doesn't work. Because when you have conversion rate of 4%, let's say only 4% of customers are affected. So you have to be a little bit more specific when you run in screaming. That didn't help me actually anyway. It's not that easy to argue against a head of sales. It depends how good of a connection you have with the CEO. Otherwise, then, yeah, career might end. But we had I still worked there for a while. But that's, I think, the tricky part, right? The same way is with the SOAP UI. It just helps us very clearly understand where we have failed. Because the time to identifying where or what we are talking about is actually very fast, very important to the time how fast we're going to resolve it. Because I don't know how many of you are dealing with business directly, but the most common thing that I hear from them is nothing works. that doesn't help in any way, because nothing works well from the customer's perspective, maybe. But when you have to figure out what actually doesn't work, is it like a API? Is it maybe a firewall that got blocked, or any network router? Then you have to actually have very, very good testing sequences that you understand what you're talking about and what you're looking for. So in that perspective, to try to cover for all the mishaps that we had, actually, we redistributed the responsibilities in the development team, where the developers take the responsibility for most of the tooling, and they take the responsibility of actually making sure that we have as big as possible test coverage. Business analysts, they take the perspective of course, the manual testing and end-to-end testing. Also, the business analysts, together with the POs, and the POs are the product owners, right? The business people. They together do the user acceptance testing, but also what is very, very important and not written here is actually that when you think of how things work, what we did right now was that we shifted left of where we are at our cost of finding a bug. And the ultimate goal is actually that you shift as left as you can. When we started, and now you can see that our test coverage is only 70%, so we are so far away from the 95% that we have that Google is doing. But we're on our way. We're also not done by far. We still have a lot of challenges. We have simply too many things to get done, right? And if I would say that we're so good and we're doing everything perfectly, I would be very naive and just lying in your face. And I don't want to do that. There's always so much that we can do. There is so much that we can improve, and there's so little time actually to do that. So what we are trying to do is actually to put the development at the beginning. The testing at the beginning. And that is by introducing TDD and BDD practices, right? That means that we can move the cost of finding a bug to the beginning. That means trying to move it as left as we can. We're improving our CI/CD processes. We're looking at more tools that we can use. The same way as I just mentioned Cypress, we're looking how to apply that. I really like the example where the visual testing was introduced and the differences in the TestCon site. Another one thing that we're looking for is actually a tactical testing. And what tactical testing means is that we don't have dedicated testers in our small squads, but we have dedicated testers in our department who come, test out a solution, and go away to test out another solution. What's the point of that, right? The point of that is actually to ensure that we still don't create a safety net for the developers where they would throw their code over the wall and leave it to the testers to test. So they still lose the safety net. That means they still need to develop the code with high quality. But from an organizational point of view, we still ensure higher level of quality because somebody actually challenges them. And through these small things, we actually try to make sure that we have a quality that is on par, or I would say actually a lot better than it was before, an organization, because now we create solutions that are a lot closer to the customer needs. They are tested very fast and delivered very fast. And in that perspective, what we do is actually we move the cost of finding a bug even more to the left. And I can tell you a joke. It's not easy to explain to people what is TDD and VDD. It's not easy to introduce these things and these perspectives to the business. And one of the better examples that I had, or the funny stories that I had with the business, was that they always will say, "Oh, release at the weekend, right? Release at the weekend. Nobody's working there. You're safe. Let's do like that." And then I asked them, "Okay, but you will need to do testing on the weekend." "Oh no, then release on the business day, right? Because we don't want to work on the weekend." So we always have these challenges to explain to the business and how the practices in the world are working in a way that why do we release on Tuesdays, for example, right? Because nobody wants to work on and fix bugs on the Saturday. And sometimes people don't get that. So it's the same way that it's very hard to explain why do we need to move the cost to the left. It's because for the people who are not involved in the development, and that's mainly business, I would say, who are just do that, right? They don't care that much because sort of you're in charge on the quality, you deliver the perfect solution, and we don't want to know how that works. And yeah, release the perfect thing in the weekend. That's not how things work in life. That's not how things, let's say, work that deliver quality, and that's not how things that are working that deliver actually true good customer experience. Because if you don't talk together, how can you ensure that you actually made sure that the TDD was set correctly at all? How can you ensure that the behavior was defined in the right way? So from that perspective, when I'm talking about that we're trying to move things to the left, the biggest challenge that we are facing is actually explaining the terms. Not the tools, because the tools are okay, but explaining that we need to invest the time in it. And the time that we invest now is comparingly very small to the time that we will need to spend afterwards to actually find those bugs and fix them afterwards. So then when I'm talking about that everybody is responsible, everyone is responsible for quality, I mean also the business part. Not only testers, not only developers, not only BAs, not only managers. Everyone is responsible for quality. And that means that when we're introducing things like that, we need to make sure that they understand and that actually we're talking in the same terms, in the same terminology, and everybody understands what is QA, everybody understands what is TDD, what is VDD, and all the terms that we're actually using so oftenly within IT. But we need to make sure that actually more people understand that, because otherwise we're not going to achieve that. And when I was listening and actually to the presentations of the previous guys, there's quite a lot of questions were, how do I convince people? Well, the easy answer to that is show them this cost of things. Because most people or most business are actually very interested in the cost of stuff. And if you can show that you can save a lot of money, by default, that's an easy business case that you can bring to them. So please remember that everyone is responsible for quality. And I will be done for now, and it's time for questions. Do you have any?